people think of it as like we're going to stand there with a high vis and a clipboard and be like, get away from each other, like that kind of thing, which is so not what it's about. There is the creative side, and actually I'm there because I want to tell a great story and want the film to be great or the TV show to be great. With proper intimacy coordinator involvement, you can go to more intense or braver or more like stretch spaces because the performers feel supported and they know that that thing that they'd like to do but they're nervous about doing, they can do it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's really great to have you all here. Thank you for coming to our intimacy coordination panel. This is one of our industry panels. It's actually the 13th panel that we've led at Garden Cinema. We've had things like film music, also trailer cutting, which I believe was really informative. I don't know, show of hands if anyone came to that one. One. Amazing. Fantastic. Well, that means we also have lots of new faces, which is great. I'm Alex. I actually work here at the Garden Cinema as one of the front of house staff, but I'm also a film director. So the day job is working at the cinema at night. She directs films. But yes, I'm very excited to be talking to Robbie and Adelaide. Thank you so much for joining us. So yeah, I mean, you'll have probably read their bios already, and I kind of want to just get stuck into it because I know we have limited time. We have about an hour. So I also want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our audience to ask questions as well. But yeah, I guess one of the main things that we like to ask as part of these is to basically ask about what an average day looks like for an intimacy coordinator. Adelaide, if you want to go first.
Great. Well, it's funny. I've come from set, and I think my first impulse is that there is no average day in our role, especially because our role is a specialist role, and head of department, but a department of one. It really depends on what kind of content you're working with, what kind of production you're working with, and the kinds of people you're collaborating with, and what they do and don't require from you, and what the scene does and doesn't require, which is kind of a non-answer, I realize. But you can have a day where you're working on a coming of age story and a really tender, delicate first kiss scene, and you've got mints and Listerine breast strips, and you're checking in, and the actors might be younger and maybe a little more nervous, or you could be on a big gigantic orgy scene on a big show and everyone's running around, and you've got another intimacy coordinator with you if you're lucky, and finding bits of tape all over your kit and everything. I will say that an average day is generally quite, I would say it feels full on, even if it doesn't look full on, if only because it is about being incredibly present and really listening and responding to what the situation requires of you in real time. In terms of days on set. Days at home doing paperwork look totally different. But yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I think the paperwork thing's a good point, because I always say with this question, like a good day on set begins far before the day on set, and that like a great day on set for me means that so much prep has gone into it that the day itself is a bit like pushing play button and everyone knows what's gonna happen. So ideally, before we've even got to set, we've got the scripts, we've done a breakdown, we've talked to the director, we've got a really clear sense from them about what they want the scene to be. We've talked to the actors, they've given us a sense of whether they align with that, whether they want to do those things. We're then sort of doing some middle, like meet in the middle, like what works, how can we make the director's vision work with the actor's boundaries. We're talking to costume, we're talking to stunts, we're talking to hair and makeup, whoever else might be relevant to the job. And we're making sure everything's really in place and everyone's very clear what's going on. We've got it in people's riders, so you didn't turn up and the day itself is like, we all know what's going on, right? Great, now let's actually shoot it, So that's in like a great situation. Very often doesn't happen, but that is what we're going for. And yeah, so the day itself can actually be simpler if all the stuff beforehand has gone well.
Yeah, and those aren't so full on, just to be clear. Those are nice. Those are really nice.
That does actually bring up a really interesting point, because I know a little bit about intimacy coordination because I've used one on my films before as well. But the legalese as part of it, I think one of the things is, I think we're all thinking about what happens on set, but there's a lot of paperwork as part of it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I can run through some of that paperwork. I mean, the legalese that you mention, it's very important to say that we are not lawyers and should not act as lawyers. But what we do provide from a legal standpoint, I mean, the role is creative on one end and collaborative, and then also health and safety on the other. And within that health and safety role, there's a lot of different elements like risk assessments and those sorts of things. But also for scenes that require a nudity or simulated sex rider, we provide the very specific consent level sort of language. And that can be, and you need to be pretty well versed in some of the more specific legal ramifications of sort of agency around representations of one's image, because even if an actor isn't performing nude but perhaps is being implied to be nude through a body double or a prosthetic or VFX, you need to understand how that functions within their contract and how that functions within their consent. And that can get really complicated, and that all happens well before, and for a SAG-AFTRA performer, 48 hours beforehand, definitely. That's just some of the paperwork.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think with the kind of expert eye that we've got on those things and those conversations, it's often also someone's being like, oh, it's a sex scene where this is going to happen. And you're like, okay, if we're talking about this, are we maybe also talking about this sex act? Might that happen? Might you want to be able to perform that on the day as an option at least? Because if it's not in your rider, then that's something that, director, production, actor kind of can't do really, right? Unless we add it in on the day. So it's thinking a bit kind of from our experience and big picture creatively to get people ready and for production to be backed up, for the actor to be backed up on what they want to do.
And I'll just add, like with the sort of on the day thing, it is a lot about pre-discussion, and there's still a lot of spontaneity to be found on the day. But if you don't at least cover what you want to potentially happen, if something isn't in the rider, we're talking about like simulated sex acts. Like if somebody wants to add a kiss on the cheek, like go. If everyone's fine, like we're fine. It's more that we want to avoid and mitigate against the risks associated with something coming up on the day and the time pressure or the power dynamics, meaning that somebody is like, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, let's add that in, and then goes home after set and is like, I don't think I liked that, or is worried about the footage or hadn't really thought about it. So a lot of it is informed consent in advance that we work towards.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of summarizing it and saying informed consent is like such a big part of everything. I guess as another question, we were talking a little bit before coming in as well, and I wanted to ask whether there were any sort of like common misconceptions that you've come across in your role, because in the grand scheme of things, like intimacy coordination has been around in various forms, but wasn't sort of regulated and hasn't been in the public consciousness for that long. So yeah, just coming back to that question of, what are common misconceptions about your role that you come across?
Yeah, where to begin? So, I mean, one of the more annoying ones is that we're sort of just there as like health and safety police. Like whilst there is the kind of health and safety well-being part of our role, I think people think of it as like we're going to stand there with a high vis and a clipboard and be like, get away from each other, like that kind of thing, which is so not what it's about. And, there is the creative side, and actually I'm there because I want to tell a great story and want the film to be great or the TV show to be great. And so I'm part of like wanting that to happen, like everyone else involved in a project. So I really believe, and I've seen it 1,000 times, that with proper intimacy coordinator involvement, you can go to more intense or braver or more like stretch spaces because the performers feel supported and they know that thing that they'd like to do but they're nervous about doing, they can do it because there's someone there who's going to advocate for them, who has talked to them about how it can logistically be done, how we can creatively achieve it, so they feel able to go to those places. So I think the annoying misconception that we're just there to like stop things and be sort of barrier, rather than someone who can generate it, make it better and improve things and allow us to go to braver spaces. That's I think my most annoying myth bust.
My most annoying myth bust I was actually talking about today on this short film I was on, because I think increasingly, especially in public discourse in the press, and people love to talk about our job because it's an opportunity to talk about sex and movies, and like that's always really fun. And obviously we find that fun as well, but there has been a sort of rise in the rhetoric that we are sort of more cast support. So like an acting coach or a dialect coach, we're only needed if the actor says they specifically want us. And there are some scenes for which that might be true, where it is left up to the actors to say that they would like someone, or the director to say, no, actually, I'd like you there to support that. But generally speaking, there are scenes that require our support regardless of whether the actor has requested it. And that's because we aren't just there for the cast or the performers. We are there for the crew. We're there for the other departments. We're there to safeguard production. And the example that I was sort of chatting about, because people are like, oh, what do you think about this? And, you know, it's not, there's a million productions to bring up, but like the whole discourse around Honora, you know, you have two actors who said, oh, you know, the director was like, do you want one? And they're like, no, we're fine without an intimacy coordinator. But then you have all of these crowd scenes set in a strip club. And the complexities of working with background artists, some of whom are real dancers, some of whom are playing patrons, and the assumptions that happen in those kinds of settings with crowd and with crew are really complicated. I did a big scene in a strip club a couple weeks ago, and it's like people assume that the male supporting artists are like happy to be paid to be there, and that the dancers are the one, you know, but actually you're going around reminding the dancers that though they are in the place where they work, they need to keep the robe on, and the male supporting artist might be actually really nervous because he's like, am I meant to be looking at her? I don't want to make her uncomfortable. Like, it's really complicated. And then there's crew, you know, the boom operator who's in there for a really intense scene, making sure that they're okay. It's a post-production. There's like tons of things we do that have very little to do with whether the actor wants us to kind of be like, are you okay? Are you okay? And that can be overlooked a lot, especially in how people talk about our role in the press.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that. And I'm not going to name names, but there was something that came in the press recently where an actor said something where they were like, oh, I don't really think that it's needed. And I'm like, that's kind of setting things back a bit. Just because you feel comfortable, and that's wonderful that you feel comfortable, doesn't mean that everyone else does. And so I think it's just important that we keep talking about it like we are, because it isn't, I think crew's the thing that mostly gets forgotten about. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as with loads of things of making a film or a TV show, like the kind of number 1, 2, 3 on the call sheet can really set the tone for a production, right? And if they're advocating for something, then it sort of does trickle down. And it's the kind of weird irony that often it's like the bigger named or more powerful, successful actors who they go to being like, do you want one? And they're more likely than others to feel like have the reps behind them and the experience and the
know how they want their nudity writer to look.
Yeah,
like,
and
have
maybe
the lawyers to back it up.
Exactly. Maybe they're literally an exec on the film, you know, like all these things, which means they're gonna be able to advocate for themselves more. And then the people lower down the call sheet, or like people who are in for less time, are not getting asked. And then because it wasn't up there and there's a culture of like, we don't do that here, it's all fine, this is a really chill production, then they're like, oh, I feel bad asking for one, like I'm a nuisance. So I think we should just start for productions going like, there is an intimacy coordinator on this project. Do you want to engage with, like, you know, just talk to them once and then I can leave you alone, actor, if you really don't want to work with him. I'm not going to be there being like, hi, the whole time. I can leave you alone. But like, we have to be part of the process, like Adelaide says.
Yeah, and an intimacy coordinator worth their salt who is trained and experienced to the level required for a project, like you should be able to have that conversation. And I always try and initiate that at the interview stage of like, how do you like to work with intimacy coordinators? You know, how collaborative do you want it to be? How hands-on or how hands-off do you want me to be on the day? Those sorts of things. Like, it's a consent-based role. Ideally, we're not going to force people to do certain things. There are some base level standards just for safety, but we can be chill if you ask, I think.
No, that's great. This is the point where I ask if anyone would like to ask a question. We have a roving mic, if you don't mind waiting. I think there's one over here. Thank you so much.
Hi. You're focusing all the time in nudity and sex and sexual scenes. And my question is if you also intervene in scenes having to do with violence, not necessarily sexual violence, things that are even stronger. Do you? That's a question.
It's a really good question. Yeah. So obviously scenes of sexual violence where there's both of those elements will definitely involved and would be working with a stunt coordinator for that element. But otherwise, it's a really interesting question. There's like a sort of one track into intimacy coordinators is often from stunt background. There's quite a lot of stunt coordinators turned intimacy coordinators. And I remember speaking to one back in New Zealand, where I'm from, and she was saying, like, actually, we think about stunt and intimacy separately, but actually, she liked thinking about intimacy as the big umbrella within which violence is part of it, right? Because all staged violence, you are touching and there is physicality. Sometimes you're there, like, straddling that person on top of each other, rolling around together very close. So there's an intimacy to that, right? So it's really interesting. The real answer is that currently on set, if there's a stunt, they're not calling intimacy, and like we aren't involved in that. But I think if there's more involved violence, it'll be something I'd be talking about and checking in with people about. I don't know what the answer is really. I think it's hoping that the stunt community, like with movement and choreographers, they are giving a sort of safety and process around the touch that means it is more protected to a degree anyway, if that makes sense. It's not like completely left to their own devices in a way that it might be if it was just improvising a making out scene or something.
Yeah, I think with violence, it's tricky, right? Because the number one risk that stunt coordinators are trained to mitigate against is physical harm, risk of physical harm, for very, real reasons. I have had this conversation before, and I think that it's tricky because our role is specific to the genre of intimacy, which isn't just sex and nudity, we should say. It's also medical intimacy, familial intimacy, worked on childbirth scenes. Sci-fi intimacy is crazy, and I love sci-fi intimacy. It's always really weird, or complicated. But I think with violence, I agree, like, it would be ideal, like Robbie said, if an awareness of the emotional and psychological risk and the consent involved in performances of violence or really, really dark, triggering material was more embedded in the stunts procedure. I do think there's kind of a composite picture that happens with, like, if you have a child actor in something that is troubling, you have a child psychologist consult. I do think people are becoming aware of offering mental health support within the film industry, but it's not necessarily integrated in set on the day. And I've done some jobs, especially recently, with really, really gruesome violence, like and these prosthetics that are just really shocking to look at. And obviously when you're on a horror film, you know what you're signing up for to a degree, but there is it's unfortunately, I think, something that is not fully covered by all the departments as of yet. And I don't think it's necessarily ours to do, but we are the nearest person sometimes to grab for in those moments. And it's tricky because I also would not want to encroach on a stunt coordinator's territory, in that way.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess as a following question from that, were you also interested in where violence and sex sort of crosses over, like sexual violence and those kind of scenes?
Well, I was talking more about, because sexual violence involves all of the things they were talking about, but I was more thinking of violence like war, wounds, torture, not necessarily related to sexuality.
Yeah,
which is very shocking. It's
well, and can be quite vulnerable, and can involve levels of nudity, I was going to say. So if there's something where, there's, this makes my job sound even wilder than it is, but it's just that I've done some jobs recently with prosthetics that are in pieces. I have done multiple jobs where there are chopped up bodies that are nude. And I'm always the one, because I've done them, going, what body parts are there, please? Like, what can we see? Because you need to make a nudity rider if that's a representation of an actor. And then because I'm engaged in these scenes that are quite gruesome, there is an interesting... It's funny with those horror elements. Sometimes they are the most chill, easygoing bits. Prosthetic people can be so funny. There was just one job where I was emailing about the prosthetic pieces, and she was like, "Oh, you mean the clone meat?" Because it was like chunks of clone, and but I think there's sometimes with the psychological stray, it really runs the gamut between gore that can sometimes feel silly and very make believe and very pretend, and stuff that feels much more psychological, and that's where we are trained in mental health first aid and those sorts of things, but we're also not mental health professionals. So if it's something that requires proper psychological professional support alongside, then that can't and shouldn't be us as well. So it's about being quite boundaried whilst also knowing that those boundaries may shift and change. Yeah, it's a great question.
It really was. That's why I wanted to dive deeper, so I hope you don't mind. Fascinating. Can we get another question? Oh, lots of questions. I don't know how to choose. Maybe in the middle?
Thanks so much. That's super interesting to hear about. I'm wondering, you said earlier on that you kind of talked about all the different things that your role involves and kind of all the different things that you juggle, but also like all the different people that you kind of care for on set or like provide support for. And then one of you said that, if we have an assistant, if we're lucky enough to have an assistant, it just seems quite bizarre to me that you don't have an assistant. And
Correct.
kind of what
Yes, it is bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, but like what is that all about? Does that come from like a deep sort of devaluing of the role, a kind of misunderstanding of what the role involves? Are you there just, not you yourselves, but like as a sort of tick box that, we've hired an IC?
Big question. I think it's a lot of those things that you've said. I think some productions it is like, oh, good, we've ticked the box. We don't really like we're going to pay as little as we can towards this. We don't really care if it's done. We just want to like look good. I do find that happens much less now. Like it was the thing more a few years ago, but now I don't have that so much. I think maybe to start by being making it about us. I think we could sometimes as a community do better for advocating for like. We need another person. I certainly am in positions where I'm like, I can make it work because I think we're quite, by nature, tend to be sort of accommodating, flexible people who are there more for making the process smooth than for what we need. So I've definitely finished days and been like, why did I not ask for someone else for that massive orgy scene? Of course I couldn't be in 3 rooms at once. What was I expecting to happen? So I've definitely, retroactively been like, I should have had someone. It's also sometimes hard to know. Like sometimes I'm on set being like, oh, it's just 2 people there and 2 people there. I'll be fine. And then it becomes a huge, impossible thing. And sometimes the big, huge group sex scene, I was on a group sex scene last week that was busy, but I was completely fine just by nature of everyone being great and it being handled really well. So it can be hard to judge sometimes, but I think we're a new role. We're still kind of getting better at advocating for ourselves, and productions are still getting used to the fact that, oh, you might need 2 or 3 people for bigger scenes, and they haven't thought about that yet because it's newer.
Well, and I think also to give a little leeway to productions here as well, we are a specialist role like a choreographer or a stunt coordinator. We have a relatively high day rate as a specialist role. So and also when we aren't needed, sometimes is really clear cut and sometimes is a little more subjective or like it depends. And so that can make us quite tricky to budget for, I think, sometimes, especially if we aren't being brought on really early, doing our breakdowns far in advance, showing them exactly when we know we're needed, when it's a maybe, that sort of thing. So I've tried to be better. I mean, Robbie and I have also been doing this for a very long time. In the spectrum, in the scope of how long the role's been around. So I think there were times early on where there weren't other ICs we could bring on for a scene where we needed somebody who wasn't a trainee, but who could like do, who was a separate arm doing the same stuff. Now I try and be a bit better about saying, hey, heads up, like this scene, I might need a second intimacy coordinator that day. I'll let you know. And then trying to be really honest with myself about it in terms of the dynamic of the space and the number of people. Like if I'm in double digits numbers of people, then I start to go, do you need a second person? And holding firm about it as well, because I think what we are capable of doing doesn't mean we should be doing that.
Yeah, that's as I've got better and more experienced, I feel more able to handle more, but that's sort of like not actually good for the practice generally. And another example is I did Industry season 4 that's just come out with Sarah Green as the lead intimacy coordinator on that, and she brought me in because the leads had intimacy, but then there was group intimacy stuff. So she wanted to be like, I'm fully with the leads, and I would then look after all the crowd stuff, right? So it can be partly about just numbers, and that was a bit of a numbers thing, but also like wanting, and that's the thing you can say to production is like, we want these actors to feel really looked after, and me not be going, sorry actors, can you wait a minute? I have to go deal with something else, So
that's what I did in the strip club, exactly. And you learn that with experience as well. And you want someone to be on monitor and then someone to be seeing what's on the floor. It's like literally about time and space. But hopefully, I think as people understand the role better and also trust that we aren't coming in to just kind of, do whatever, like that we are making it easier and better wherever we can, then hopefully there will be a little more understanding that we need help sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's really good for people to have a port of call, someone that they can go to if there's an issue. And then if you're too stretched between different things, I mean, just as a comparison, it was interesting. When I shot one of the films I was on, I actually have a directing partner, and one of us would do the actors and one of us would talk to the camera team. So, and it allowed us, despite shooting not for a long period of time, we shot for like a couple of weeks to do a feature, but it allowed us to give more dedicated time to each of the individuals, and overall allowed us to do more work quickly rather than one person being literally spread between 10 different people at the same time. I guess that leads me into actually a question related to that, which is, what were your original backgrounds? How did you come into intimacy coordination originally?
Do you want me to go first? So my background is that I grew up acting in theater, in sort of hippy-dippy youth theater stuff, and then went to, I'm American, by the way. What? But I came over to the UK for undergrad, and while I was there as a student, there was a lot of student theater, and I started directing. We were kind of catching up about this in the bar. Unintentionally, at least subconsciously, the second show I ever directed when I was at uni had a lot of simulated sex in it. So at 19, I choreographed my first sex scene with two 18-year-olds and was like, I want to do this well, but I don't know why it's my job. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then went on to direct a few shows in undergrad that had full frontal nudity, simulated sex of a variety of kinds. And so it was always kind of in the back of my head about having to figure out an approach to that. And I did the best job, and in hindsight I did pretty good. It wasn't very efficient, but it was pretty ethical. But then went back to DC, where I'm from, was doing a lot of movement devised collaborative theater, and came back over for drama school for directing. And it was there that I kind of encountered the work at its very beginning. So I was really lucky to kind of get in. I started training in 2017, and the role originated for TV and film in 2018. Predates it in theater like by about a decade, but so I was really lucky to kind of, that the work found me at a point in my life where I was ready to kind of move in that direction. So my background's directing and movement, and then performing and like collaborative work, I think, also.
Yeah, great. It's just always great to, it's like you don't necessarily see where your career is headed, especially in film, any art. It's like, I think the more you do, the more you find.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Yeah, lots of similarities. I also grew up doing youth theatre, less hippy-dippy maybe, like Alice in Wonderland style. But I was doing youth theatre, acting, loving acting, or doing all the youth groups I could. And then went to university, did acting, but then kind of caught the directing bug and was directing shows. Similarly, was directing shows where I was like, I'm finding my way to manage the intimacy in these, but it does feel like a real stretch for like we are being left to do this as 18, 19-year-olds, and was also acting in shows, watching my friends doing intimacy and being like, this is not good.
Oh my God, yeah, the shows I was in at uni were.
Exactly. So then left, was assisting directors. I did movement training. I did some fight training. So I kind of loved nerding out on like, it's really detailed movement work. It has a lot of emotion and character to it. You're trying to sell something that isn't actually happening through clever choreography tricks. So I loved that, and that's a lot of truth in that with intimacy. And then I was separately volunteering with an organization called Beyond Equality, doing workshops in schools with boys and young men about consent and gender-based violence. So I had the sort of consent facilitation side from that. I was theatre making queer theatre, and in that queer theatre there was kind of a lot of intimacy would tend to come up, so sort of finding my way to handle that. And then Adelaide was like, hey, there's this workshop happening, you should go to it. And I went to this intimacy workshop, and I was like, yes, this is all the things that I've done. And then Yarit Dor, who trained me in fight, had trained in America as an intimacy coordinator, and then she was co-running a course. And so I got onto that course, which I did with Adelaide.
Yeah. And I will say that, like, I think Robbie and I, especially being part of the sort of first cohort who trained in the UK, I was with like a different organization, and then we did our certification together. We, I think, were some of the few, there's a couple other that come to mind, whose backgrounds were in directing. A lot of people came from, especially in the UK, more of a movement background even than fight. Like, there are some fight people like Yarit, but it is interesting the different pathways in, because I think we just bonded very early on. Obviously, have very similar shock, like hearing it out loud, quite similar.
We
Backgrounds.
found each other. That's wonderful. I love that. Any other questions in the room? I think we had some at the front in the third row, and then I'll come to you in the back.
Yeah, I'm new to this idea of riders, but you talking about, I can see that there need to be. Can you explain riders more? And also, how much, these link questions, do you always get a chance to meet the actors before you go on set? And if you have, they consented in their rider to appear nude or semi-nude and then panic when it actually comes to filming, how do you deal with all of that?
Those are good questions. I'll answer just quickly the actor one, which is we always have to have a conversation in advance with any performer who's doing simulated sex or nudity. And that is to, I guess we should have said, like a key function of our role is, from a consent and safety standpoint, is being a third party outside of the sort of conventional power structure of set who has a one-on-one confidential conversation with the performer about what they are and aren't comfortable performing. And that is sort of the safety check that means it's not a producer or director being like, you're comfortable taking your top off, right? And then they're like, yeah, sure, anything you say. Like, that's not freely given consent. So we are that person. And that process is part of what then feeds into a nudity or simulated sex rider or waiver. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, I can begin and then you say more. So yeah, rider is basically a document which is saying that an artist agrees for them represented simulating sex or nude, that they agree for that to go out into the public. It's obviously illegal to share a nude image of someone without their consent, just in the world, nothing to do with TV and film, right? So it's something that says this actor is okay with that happening. So that's why it's very much protecting production as well, right? So production, the actor can't then later be like, I didn't know you were going to do that. Like, there's a document which said that they're signed, that they're happy to do that. But also, if it's not in the rider, then production knows they can't do it legally. Just, again, not a like equity legally. So that's the function of that. In terms of it changing, it can absolutely retract. So because you've signed it a rider, that doesn't mean you then have to do it. Obviously, sometimes productions like, but it's in the rider, as sort of they feel like that is then an example that it was okay. And indeed, at some point, the actor felt that was okay. But for consent to really be consent, it has to be reversible. So we are there partly on the day, so that if that actor says, you know what, I really thought this would be fine, but now it's here, cold light of day, there's cameras and the people, I don't want to do it. We are there to go, that's fine, it's not going to happen, and we'll find a different way to make that happen. And actually also, if on the day they're like, I thought I wouldn't want to do this, I'm feeling great, we had a great scenes last week, I'm good, I actually will do more, then I'm there to make sure that they're definitely agreeing to that, and that's coming from them, and how that can be added to the rider, so production, and they are all protected.
I will just add on that, because there is a tricky thing about riders, and assuming that there's filmmakers here, like a rider is to protect the actor, to ensure there's informed consent in advance, but it is also to protect production in terms of them knowing that they are able to shoot what they require to tell the story. So there is a certain point as well, and every rider will have different clauses in it, and they vary in terms and that sort of thing. But the example I use when I sort of teach is Boogie Nights, right? You cannot play Dirk Diggler in Boogie Nights if you aren't, for the Paul Thomas Anderson film about the porn industry, if you aren't willing to simulate sex and perform full frontal nudity as shown through a prosthetic, right, to make that film. And so some clauses in riders will have provisions that say, if the actor changes their mind, production reserve the right to shoot this material through the use of a body double, to be approved by the actor or not. But I think that is where there is sometimes a tension. And the solution, I always think, to that kind of situation, the best way to avoid that, which you can never fully avoid, things happen, people's minds change for a million reasons, but making it absolutely crystal clear at the point of casting what the intimacy requirements are for a role, so that anybody taking on the role of Dirk Diggler in Boogie Nights, for example, is aware of exactly what that means. That it's not like, oh, kissing and then the camera drifts off and we never see. It's shown to this degree, and they have to be comfortable with these things in order to play that part and tell that story. Because you can get into tricky places, and Our job is to help facilitate that and make sure that consent is ongoing and clear. But that is also, a rider will function partially as production's insurance that they are able to make the film they're trying to make, which can get complicated. Actors do not rush rushes in my experience. The rushes will have a restricted distribution, so anything that's marked R, so anything that has a closed set, should be marked R on the sort of clapperboard and on the notes for the day, and that will have a limited distribution. So the rushes go to a more restricted list. But actors generally don't watch rushes. They might watch playback on the day if they want.
Yeah, I've sometimes had actors who are like, I will do nudity, they've agreed to do nudity, but they're feeling a bit like, how's it going to be shot? That then they go, yeah, can I just see like a still of something? And I show it to them and they're like, got weird, but okay, got it. And then they'll like have seen it there, you know.
Yeah, so they can imagine how it's going to look in the final product as well, so they have some assurances, I guess.
But for some actors, that's the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah,
and they're like,
and then some of
don't.
them might even not look.
Yeah,
because it's
exactly.
too much. I think we had a question right next to
Yeah.
there, and then we'll come to
I
that.
was wondering, obviously you're working very closely with actors, director, but do you also work with cinematographer, figuring out the angles, and as well maybe post-production, editor and such? What does that collaboration look like?
Great
Yeah, well,
question.
just as an example from this week, yesterday, I was on set and working really closely with the DOP because we were filming lots of different angles on a sex scene, which was implied full nudity, but we obviously are concealing genitals. And so it was shot from literally every single angle. So a lot of it being like, how is this going to work in one sex position? So working really closely with her to be like, okay, where do you want to shoot from? Okay, if we just angled like this, then we're easy. Or, okay, if you want to shoot there, then I need to know that the actors are going to move their bodies at some point so we can hide things better and have that conversation, both in which we did before the day, so we felt really clear, and then on the day, just as we went through, and that she wanted to like add another shot in or change the lens so it was going to be closer and all those things. And she was like, look, it's going to look really beautiful if we can do this. Is there a way we could find hands to track down there and that could take us here? I'm like, yeah, great. So like we had a really lovely back and forth to work together to make it, she's trying to make it look beautiful and with lights and everything, and I can help facilitate that with the choreography and be that kind of easy in with the actor, or kind of sometimes I feel like sort of translating things for the director or DOP into things which are actionable and easy for the actors, where they feel like there's a easy choreographic in for them or something. But camera and often that sort of being with a camera, I've been at the side being like, yeah, you can see the modesty garment, can we tilt? Okay, yeah, let's move that, like try to find the perfect way to make it sell. Yeah.
Or if the DOP doesn't want you to talk to them, you just move the actors. That's what I do. If I wouldn't dare say like, tilt your shot up a little bit, I'm just like, scooch down. With post-production, I've had some really nice experiences lately where, one was an ADR sex scene that only existed in ADR because it was behind a door, and it was two actors who had separate sessions in separate cities, and I was there for both of them, which we don't always get called in or even told about what's happening in post-production. So that was really nice to be able to help. I mean, that's a challenge as an actor to do on your own in a dark room with a sound person. The sound person was also like, it's nice to have you here, because sometimes they just make me leave the mic on and leave the room and I feel really weird. And So that's been a really nice experience in post-production. I have been invited to watch a sort of rough cut of the film before, but that's on projects where I have a really close working relationship with the directorial team and they want my opinion, and the intimacy is really integral. But on those jobs as well, there's been like a sort of cut of the sex scenes put together for the two lead cast to see and to give notes on, and I also get folded into that, which is really helpful. That tends to be on jobs where the intimacy is much of the story. That doesn't happen on much. But I will say, back to the point around violence and really challenging content, I think safeguarding and considering people in the editing room to do with all triggering material needs to be handled much better. That's not our department, but I like to mention
No,
it
I'd
anyway.
agree. I have a friend who works in post sound who literally posted about this recently because, you don't know who
over and
has
over.
experience with what whether it's essay or anything like that, it can be really hectic. So
and they're watching it or listening to it again and again and again and again and again.
Yes.
And I think that does wear on a person, and nobody really thinks about that part of it.
No, it's true. I think we had a question in the middle, I believe, and then we'll come over to you. Is that all right? So, Gassan, sorry, I meant in the middle.
I see. Sorry, I kind of
okay.
sneaked
We
in
will
there.
definitely make sure to get.
Sorry, that was a bit
after
naughty.
that.
This is also slightly fan orientated, so please forgive me about this. And it's about Pillion, which I have to say was just got to be one of the best films I've seen in a very long time. And it's a very particular question, and maybe you might have to explain the scene because I'm being a little bit naughty here by being very particular. But there's a very particular scene in the car park which involves a very particular power play, which I thought was just so well done. And I'm very curious to know how much of that was the actors, how much of it was script, and how much of it was you. Because it was such a powerful and brilliant moment.
In the alley,
yes,
their first encounter.
Their first encounter. Well, I'm
not
going to be too
veiled we
I'm
should
not
be.
going to be too graphic about it, but I'm sure you can
I
be.
know, well, I don't want to spoil it for people, but also don't want people to be like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Because they're talking in a sort of allegory. There's, okay, hands in your ears if you don't want spoiler. There's the first encounter they have is sort of quite aggressive. Oral sex, and there's bootlicking, and is that sort of the exactly in terms of I loved working on Pillion, and I think it's a great film, regardless of intimacy involvement. It's just such a
Robbie's
great
work in
project.
it is very brilliant, and you should just know that comes through in the film.
Stop it. Dirk is then. So Harry Lighton, director-writer, was really great and clear about what those moments were. So he was great in a way that I love with directors when they're like, they understand that it's going to have actor choice and actor sway and that I might have input, but they're like, this is how I see it, right? So it means we're starting in a really clear place. So that was great. And then the actors, also had their ideas for it and how they wanted it to work. And then I had things which I felt would make it work, and that's partly just choreographic tricks, and that's partly figuring out translating Harry's vision into it with the performers. So that we'd rehearsed it before the day as well. I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm saying that. And so then when we got to it, I think we also filmed that quite late in the process. That was also great because we'd had built up all the other things through the whole project, because it is quite full on. I do find oral sex scenes can be kind of one of the harder ones to film, particularly when you're trying to go through the kind of journey of it for the person performing the oral sex on someone, because it's hard to see a lot of their face. And so we're doing some really careful stuff with camera work. That's a good example of working with camera, to be like, how can we believe that this is oral sex, see this person's face and reaction, and have the movement be quite vigorous. So it was just a real good collaboration of everyone involved, but Pillion is such a good example of that across the board, that from producer, I was brought on so too early. The only time I've been brought on too early to a project. So early to a project, and could talk to DOP. Harry Lighton was great, but Harry and Alex, the two actors, were brilliant. And so it just all made it really straightforward. And then we had the great prosthetic for that scene as well, and had barriers in that would make things able to be really close and that we could all be fine. But is that answer your question that we want to talk about?
Thank you very much.
It was great. Thank you.
That's great. If we can just get the microphone in the middle, and then after that, if you wouldn't mind passing the mic all the way down the row to this lovely, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello. I suppose my question is, how do you approach a situation where you come in on the day and the director wants you there, the actors know you're coming in, it's all been everything's in the riders, like we were saying about earlier. But if you find that one of the actors really wants you there and they like your presence and they're sort of comfortable with that, but then the other actor goes, actually, I want you here. You're doing a scene between these two people. One of them is very happy you're there, wants you there, wants the support. The other one's not budging, for lack of a better word. How do you handle that situation, adapt your style? Do you need to adapt your style, and how do you make it comfortable for everybody, including yourselves?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I would say that, consent is not straightforward, and when consent levels are conflicting, then you try and defer to the person who has the greater vulnerability, I think. And I've never been in a situation where somebody... Actually, that's not true. Sorry, I was over here, then I was like, that's not true. I have had situations where... not where somebody was like, I don't want to see you, I don't want you around. Like, if my relationship with a performer has broken or never developed enough so much that they refuse to have me on set, I would remove myself from that job and tell them to find an intimacy coordinator that performer felt comfortable with, because then I just can't do my job, and then I am there seemingly ticking a box that is not ticked in any form or fashion. So that's like a professional boundary for me. And for a scene that was really intense intimacy, say a sex scene or an intimate close scene that's not just like a kiss or a hand on a thigh, like I do need to be present. I have, for scenes that are a little more in that kind of gray area, been present on set per one actor's request, but in the background. And that tends to be circumstances where you have one actor with a ton of power who's maybe a bit more experienced, maybe older, that does not necessarily track all the time, but like, you know, has done, it wouldn't occur to them that I'm there for a scene of like coercive touch on the thigh. But the other actor who's receiving that touch is like, I totally trust them. I feel so comfortable with my scene partner, but I know that if something comes up, I want you there, just as a safety, but I don't want it to seem like I don't trust them, so can you be in the background? And then I can do that. So there's all of these sort of calculations you make in terms of how to provide the support of the role and try and meet everyone's needs. If there were a situation where it was a scene that required me and one actor refused to have me there and the other actor wanted me there, I would have to be there. And that is where, like, yes, it's consent based and ideally it's all hunky-dory and everybody's happy with what we do, but sometimes we do have to draw clear professional boundaries because that is our job as well at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the balance, I think, does come up every now and again where someone's like, I want you there, but I don't want to seem like I want you there.
It's
because
very tricky.
Unfortunately, this lovely, weird industry, you know, can seem like, exactly, it makes people go, oh, what, is there something wrong? Or you don't like the production? Or are you like not feeling good about this? You know,
they don't. Oh, they're kind of a diva. They're kind of needy.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely do some like private in the trailer, then being like, I'm nervous about this. Can you please keep an eye on this? And then we go out there and they're like, they're actors, so they're good at pretending that they're completely fine. And then privately, I'm giving them a mint and being like, don't worry, that thing you said, it looks great. It's fine. Like, yeah. And then like drifting back into the background. So I've definitely had a few examples of that, where it's tend to be more like, yeah, it's partly where you're like keeping an eye on things and in case something changes. But I had one example where one actor was like, why are you here? Like, fine, be around, but whatever. And the other actor really wanted it to look great. And so he was just like, give me the creative notes. Like, I want feedback on how this can be elevated. And the other one that wouldn't have crossed their mind that I would be there for that. So that's they're moving apart. They're going to their easy up, hair and makeup's with them, and I'm coming over and being like, yeah, if we just adapt this just for that one person. So in a way, the other person kind of didn't need to know, you know, they knew I was going to be on set. They can see me around, but yeah.
And that is where I think you do that kind of adaptation of your process for every actor, regardless of whether they need you or how much they need you, because what they need or don't need, it varies. You know, they might need you there to know that their scene partner has been checked in with so that they can feel confident in performing how they want to perform, you know. So there's a variety of ways that people do and don't need us. I will say that there are times where certain things that people assume won't be vulnerable, like male nudity above the waist, for example, I will be there sometimes and have to play a bit, for an individual even, a bit of that, like, I'm here just because, and be like, not because he said he needed me, don't worry. Yeah. And like, that is a tricky thing sometimes, but is also, if you are able to provide that kind of safeguard, it's nice to do. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you have to say like, they've requested me. But
yeah, sometimes you can't get out of it, but that's okay. Yeah, I'm conscious of time. I think we've got time for one more question. So if we could get the mic just to the end of the row there, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm a writer and director from India, and I would love to make more films about sex. So the doubts...
I'm available.
We both are. We love working together.
I obviously loved Pillion, but my question is about like recurring sex scenes in shows. For instance, industry or sex education or Game of Thrones for that matter. Now, when we have like a short list and we have the short division and the days are divided and the story is evolving, and maybe we are shooting scene 7, which includes a sex scene, before we shoot scene 1, or we shoot the next scene 10 much after that, which is just a kissing scene. And there are multiple characters on that show who will have sex at different times. How do you take the notes from the director and incorporate it in the body language of the actors, but maintain the evolution or the continuity so that it does not look jarring? Because I have seen a couple of shows or scenes where the sex actually takes me out of the, I'm like, oh, this is not how they would do it. Like, because, it's not. And also sometimes there are actors who've done a sex scene in a particular film, and I remember that. And then I'm watching it here, and this character is completely different from that character, but they're having sex in that way. So how do you make sure that every sexual experience then is unique but still in alignment with what the director wants?
Such a great question. What a director-writer question of you. I love it. I mean, that's a compliment. So maybe an example is I worked on a show called Mary and George, which is like full of a lot of different types of simulated sex between lots of different characters and different intimacy. That was, intimacy's bodily functions. There's, urination, defecation, all sorts of stuff happening in that show. And we were filming across 6 months. And I was there, Adelaide actually covered for me on the first week.
I was wondering when you were going to mention that.
It was
a big week.
No one helped me.
Very big week.
So that first week to then I was there on the penultimate day. So that's across 6 months and obviously we're shooting it in completely cuckoo order all over the place, right? So that's where I'm partly there to go, okay, this scene we're filming that scene we filmed 3 months ago, that has happened. Is happening after this, so how can we make this feel different? And the director of whatever is like, Robbie, okay, this final sex scene, what haven't we seen yet? Like, give me that. I was like, okay, we've done this. We haven't done this. We're like, great, let's do that. So I've got that overall eye on how we're tracking intimacy through the show, that it feels diverse, but exactly, we have a shared language, because I've been on it the whole time, that we know that the intimacy in this show wants to feel really like frank or raw, or like you're doing something really titillating or sensual or whatever, so you can like weave it all in within the right umbrella that it feels true. And like I think that example with the actor across 2 different projects and the sex feels really similar. I think that's where intimacy coordinators' creative eye and movement tips and choreography is what will help you there, because it's going, this might feel right for you as a person, but it's not characterful. So like a few bits of like movement advice or whatever can make this feel more true to the character and the story that we're doing.
Yeah, I will add that we are only as useful as people want us to be creatively, because there's a lot of tools. We do a lot of training, and there are a lot of tools that a well-trained intimacy coordinator can offer to help separate the personal from the professional body. Because if you are simulating an orgasm in an ADR session, like, it's hard to be like, how does my character do that? Like, if you haven't performed that already before, and I think much more so than violence, we map intimacy onto the people performing it. You don't watch a great fight scene and go, wow, they probably really wanted to kill each other. But people might watch a love scene, so to speak, and be like, I bet they're really in love. And I think that does mean that when an actor wants us to be involved in their process of the creative conception of their character's sexual journey, we are able to then give tools to help broaden the spectrum of what that looks like, or to look at the historical context or the cultural context of the characters and how they're relating to help inform that. I wish that was something that people wanted from me all the time. And so it really does depend. But I think like Robbie said, you think about the spectrum. Like, our job is the intimacy. We've got a tracker, a color-coded spreadsheet of all of the scenes, and we can rearrange it in story order or put it in shooting order, and it's our job to hold on to that kind of through line. But if nobody, cares to ask, I'm certainly not going to storm in and be like, this is looking a lot like the sex scene you did in that other movie. Like, I don't think that would necessarily be well received. But I think it would be, I hope, as people learn to sort of work with our role and trust our role moving forward more, that will be more of what they see we can offer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think this has been really enlightening. I don't know about you. I'm afraid that's us all out of time, but thank you all very much for coming. Some absolutely excellent questions. Do feel free to stick around and mingle in the bar. We will also be putting this up on YouTube, so tell your friends. There's also, if you want to suggest any topics for any future talks, please do contact us. We want to know. We want to do more of these. And last but not least, if you wouldn't mind helping me thank Robbie and Adelaide for attending. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Go see Pillion.